What if I told you that the world's top performers, Olympians, CEOs, elite teams, they aren't succeeding because they're thinking positively, but they're thinking neutrally? I'm Marcia Narine Weldon, and welcome to the podcast where we help high achieving professionals lead with clarity and live with intention. I don't coach Olympic athletes, but today's guest, Gary Chupik, he's here to tell you how you can learn from what the best of the best do so you can perform at your best no matter what you do. And he's also going to answer that cryptic question that I led off with. So he's internationally recognized as one of the top mental performance coaches in the world. He unlocks performance in professional teams, athletes, and business professionals that want to get to the next level. So his unique methods are unprecedented. He brings out the best in every client. So welcome to the podcast, Gary.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Marcia.
Great. So you call yourself an unlocker because you unlock potential. So what's one thing that most high achievers fail to do unless they do it consistently?
Well, they think that there's one thing that'll solve all of their issues, and that's just simply not true. And what most high performers have to understand is that it's just kind of like carrying around a tool bag with you, that you have to have a lot of tools in your bag to be able to handle all the different situations that you're going to go through. So, when we teach resilience really isn't a tool, it's an outcome. If you put all these tools into play and into practice, and then you can sort of achieve a level of resilience. So it's understanding that there's a lot of work that goes into it, and there's a lot of practice that goes into it away from their playing surface or from their arena of competition, and that you applying these things to your real life is the practice field. And so everyone around you benefits, but it's working pretty hard at it.
So you're known for your unique methods that have helped top athletes and professionals around the world. So how do you adapt those methods when you're working with someone who's already achieved significant success, but they feel stuck? They think that they've reached the peak of their performance.
Yeah, it's really interesting that a lot of people have a misconception about mental performance coaches, and that is that if there's something wrong, now it's time to go get somebody to help. However, the best don't live their life that way. The best always want to get better. So they're looking for that cutting edge or for that extra, shall we say, edge in terms of their competition. And so the best players always want to get better, and they're looking for it. And it's no different for business professionals who might feel like they're stuck. Stuckness is an interesting state. A lot of people say that they feel stuck, and it's typically because they're trying to choose between two different things. And so you get stuck in between. And that feeling in between, you don't really commit to one and you don't really commit to the other. You kind of want a little bit of both, and therefore you get stuck. And for professional athletes and high achievers, there's a cost to pay to be really good at what you do. And so to reach that next level, like for example, to go from, let's say 94% to 98% on a test is a lot of work. To go from 65 to 89 is no big deal, but to get that few extra percentage points of performance is very difficult. And so there's something called the illusion of choice. And that is am I willing to pay the cost to get what I want? And so the illusion is well, I can keep living the same way or keep doing the same things and maybe achieve, what I want. But the reality is that no, you really do need to live your life in a far more disciplined way. And sometimes it's discipline and sometimes it's a sacrifice issue. And so sometimes a player can be more disciplined in a particular area, and sometimes they need to sacrifice at a level that they're not used to.
So when you talked about getting from that 94 to 98%, and I think a lot of people that are listening are those people, what drives that person to want to go from 94 to 98? Whereas you have some people like, I'm good with the 90. What do you see as the difference between the people that want to get that extra? They're already at the top, but they still want to compete again, whether it's against others who are also at the top or compete against themselves. What is it? Is that something that's born? Is that something you train on? Is that something you coach on?
It really is. There's different motivations for different things. And so it depends how in touch a person is with their motivations and what is driving them. And I like to think of it more as drive more than motivation, because sometimes we can be driven by things that we're not motivated by, but they still drive us. So, for example, someone, let's say, who is not really motivated to work really hard, but they're driven by a sense of competition, or they're driven by a sense of wanting to provide for their family, or they're driven by, some achievement that they want to accomplish because it says something about their identity. And so we don't always know about motivation, but if we can get to the drives, that can be really helpful. And then once we get to the drive, then we can begin to unpack and unlock that particular person, because they obviously have a desire to do it and they have a drive to do it. It's just perhaps they haven't thought through all the different options that they have, or sometimes they don't really know what they want and how badly they want it. Like, for example, I think a lot of performance is identity based. And what I teach, what I call identity based mental performance. And if we can figure out who you are and what you want and why you want it and how badly you want it, then we can sort of, draw some fences or guidelines around our particular practices or skills or disciplines that we can teach a player. But they really need to know who they are, because all of us have to play off our strengths, no matter who we are. And oftentimes we'll want to, spend a lot of time working on our weaknesses, but that's not always helpful for professional athletes or high performers in business. You got to where you are based on your strengths. You didn't get there based on your weaknesses. So if you are remarkable at a particular thing, you kind of got to stay in that lane a little bit. And yeah, you can work on your weaknesses to become more well-rounded and complete. However, the resources or the treasure is going to be in tapping into your strengths. And so a lot of it really is do you know yourself? Do you know what you want? Because knowing what you want it's the difference between winning and losing. Knowing what you want, because if you don't know what you want exactly, like being able to pinpoint it, then you'll be hesitant. And if you're hesitant in sports, it's winning and losing. In life sometimes, or in business, or in high pressure situations, it's the difference between succeeding and not succeeding. And so that hesitation is a reflection of a hesitancy and a non-confidence in what you want or in your ability. So knowing who you are and knowing what you want, I can't understate the importance of that.
So we could start the podcast right there, because you just said like 50 really important things, but I want to highlight two things that for the audience to really make sure that they focus on. And if you got to go back and rewind, make sure you listen to this paragraph again, because I think this is the two biggest things that I see when I talk to leaders, whether it's leaders, and by the way, when I use the word leader, I mean, you could be the leader in your friend group. The leader has nothing to do with your title, right? A leader is somebody that people want to follow and motivates people to do their best, as far as I'm concerned. So when you don't know what you want, because so many people, they don't really know what they want. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know what you want, then you're going to get stuck in the place where you are. Well, I don't really know what I want. So, I mean, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. And then you get stuck there. Or you're willing to put up with things that go completely against your value system because you haven't named and claimed what it is that you want. And the second thing that you talked about is you really got to play to your strengths. So I've been an HR professional for many years back. And I remember we're always focusing people on like, you got to get better on these. And I said, they're never going to get better on these. It's just not what they want to do, right? And now as a coach, I give people the Clifton Strengths thing. And I said, we got to focus. You got to surround yourself with the people who do what you don't do well. Exactly. And you focus on what you really do well. Because when you do, even if it's something that's not your strength, you might be able to do it and you'll do it well, but you're going to be miserable. And most people can't do something they don't like and that's not their strength well. But superstars can, but it takes away from what they should really be doing. So the message for everybody, I think, in what Gary just said is figure out what it is that you truly, truly want. What makes your heart sing? What makes you want to wake up in the morning and do it? Not every day there's going to be unicorns and sprinkles and life is joyful, but that you don't dread it and that you look forward to it. And then also, what are you really good at? And what comes so easily to you that other people say, how did you do that? And you can't even explain it because it's just what you do. And that's what you focus on. And then surround yourself with the people who are good at implementation or execution or whatever it is that you're not so good at. So I really want to thank you for bringing those 2 points home, because I think those are the two biggest things that I think keep people stuck or keep them unhappy.
Yeah, and there's also this idea of the illusion of choice, right? Like, for example, when you go to, let's say, the Cheesecake Factory and you are, let's say, wanting to be an elite athlete or really good at your nutrition in terms of your whatever your craft is. Well, when you go to the Cheesecake Factory, I mean, it's 12 pages long. The menu is massive. And you can pick anything. The average person can pick anything that they want. But if you want to be really good at nutrition and you really care about that, boy, that menu sure narrows down. And now they have like it's skinny page or something like that. Like
Right.
it's just for the healthy choices. But if you want to be an elite eater, an elite at nutrition, an elite at what you do, you probably don't have a choice. You have to eat really healthy. And so narrowing down your choices to accomplish the goals and dreams that you have is crucial because you can't entertain all the possibilities. It's just impossible. So you really do need to narrow down exactly what your choices are. And if you can do that and sort of like move away all the noise and sort of put those blinders on so you can accomplish what you want to accomplish. It's a crazy way to think, but I tell people often, if you want to be an elite performer, you have to have your kind of crazy. And no one else is going to understand, but you need your kind of crazy. So what's your kind of crazy?
My kind of crazy?
Yeah, well, it could be like you're a high performer. What's your kind of crazy?
My kind of crazy is that I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not. I am not good at sitting there um, doing all the details for all the big ideas I have. I have to surround myself. So my kind of crazy is I could sit there for 10 hours and forget to go to the bathroom if I'm really in flow,
I
right? To the
love
point
it.
where, and I, by the way, tell people to never do that. Right. So when I talk about productivities, you've got to take a break. You've got to let your prefrontal cortex, let it shut down for a little while and go outside. But I can sit there for 6, 7 hours and work on a course or work on something like that. And there's no place else I'd rather be. I'd rather be on a plane for 21 hours where I can just sit there and think and put ideas out there, and I did that recently last year. Didn't worry me at all. So I think that's my kind of crazy. Other people would be like, that is living hell on earth for me. Please don't make me do anything like that. Right?
Yeah, but it's
But I
easy for
know,
you.
but I know for me,
Right?
right?
For
That
you, it's your kind of crazy and it was easy for you. And so you found it. And so
yeah,
tapping into that, and I call it, again, identity based mental performance, because we're not transposing somebody else's, what makes somebody else really good at something. We're not transposing that onto Marcia. Marcia is her own brilliance. And
my
so
own
if we can
person.
just respect, her brilliance and respect who she is, and respect her identity, and then you're just so much further ahead. You're not fighting the resistances and the undercurrents. You're just sort of accepting and surrendering to who you are, and now perfect that.
What's your kind of crazy?
It's not very different from yours. I can work with a client for, 10 hours straight and they're exhausted. And I'm just like, I could go another 3 or 4 hours. So I do something called the game plan for life, which is how to live like a professional athlete in your everyday life. So how to live a high performance life. And so one of the things that I can do is sit with a client for 8 or 10 hours. Usually they fly to Seattle or they fly me to where they are. And
Mhm.
I'll spend 8 or 10 hours with them in a day, and they're exhausted, and I'm just getting going. So
Like,
I
let's
just
go,
love
round
people.
two.
Yeah, I
Let's
just
just
love
go in.
people. I love deep diving. I love when I get into flow state and it doesn't feel like work at all.
And so most of our people are going to be listening to this. But if you're watching this on YouTube, I want you to go and see what Gary's face looked like when he talked about doing what he loves. There is something, it's true, it's true. And you can tell if you walk into a store, I don't care if it's, CVS or whatever, when people love what they do, if they're just happy, the happiest sales clerk, there's something that shows on their face. And when you were talking, it showed on your face. So I encourage people listening, if somebody were to ask you what you do or when you get into flow, do you have that look? Does your face change? Do your eyes change? That's how you know that you're doing what you're supposed to do, right? And I think you and I
Well,
are both lucky that we live in our purpose and we can do it because so few people get to do that.
correct. Yeah, and a lot of it is alignment, right? Like in my system, in my game plan for life, I have a system, and it's and by at the end of 2 days, people can quote word for word what their purpose is, what their calling is, what their vision for
Wow.
their life is, what their strategy to get there is, what their personal philosophy is, what are the current assignments that are on their life right now that they're participating in, and an executable plan, and they know word for word the answer to every one of those things after 2 days. So a lot of it is about alignment, and when you're aligned with those things, man, you just get to live out of the overflow. It's the most beautiful thing in the world.
So, do you ever work with people who have that fear of success, but that success anxiety? So the pressure, but they have the pressure to keep performing at such a high level that there's anxiety about keeping at that same level or getting better for the future. And how do you address that issue?
Yeah, actually, the fear of success is a real thing because what goes through most high performers' head is, who am I going to have to become? So it's an identity issue. Who am I going to have to become to sustain that kind of lifestyle? And the fear is will I like me? Will I like the person that I have to become? And oftentimes it's no. They don't want to be who it is going to be necessary for them to be successful. And so what they'll do is they'll feel stuck. And coming back to that idea of stuckness is, yes, I want to be highly successful. Yes, I want to do these things, but I don't think I'm going to like who I am. And therefore I'm stuck because I don't want to do the things that are necessary to get there. Or I might not like myself when I get there. And so, yeah, they get really stuck. And that is definitely a dilemma. However, it can be answered. And it depends on their own self-efficacy. It depends on their own perception of who they are. I'm a big believer in archetypes. Who do you think you are? Like, do you feel like you're the hero? Do you feel like you're a warrior? Do you feel like you're an intellect? Do you feel like you're an educator? Who do you perceive yourself to be? And as you sort of fit into that mold, or you fit into that, I like to call it a jacket. Like when you fit into that jacket, is it a good fit for you? So a lot of it comes back down to their own self-perception and identity. And I think if people can get in touch with their identity, listen, it's okay to not be the best of the best of the best of the best of the best. It's okay to not be that because of what it requires in so many people. But I would also push back a little bit in saying that I think done are the days where people are really, really outstanding or exceptional or elite at one thing at the risk of all these other things in their life. So the rest of their life is a dumpster fire, but they're good at this one thing. And I think those days need to be done as a mental performance coach. I just see the train wreck of relationships and marriages and families. All these things just get destroyed at the altar of success. And I just wonder if it's worth it. In fact, I don't think that it is.
So you talked a little bit about your archetypes. Would you mind giving a one-liner on each of them and how you would coach them differently? You talked about the hero.
Yeah,
Is
great
there a
questions.
difference in how they have to be coached?
Yeah, you do have to change your coaching a little bit, because if someone perceives themselves, let's say, as I'll go, sort of be ridiculous here for a moment, but let's say if somebody sees themselves as a warrior, or a princess warrior. Well, if you try and coach them like they're, let's say, a wise old guide or a Yoda type, they won't relate to it internally, so they'll nod their head on the outside. Yeah, I get that. I understand that. That's wonderful. But if you don't use or change your language to warrior language, then you're missing out on a piece of their own perceived identity that you can tap into as a coach. And if you can get them to start using that language and sort of evoke those emotions and those thoughts and sort of have them rise to the surface a little bit and come out, then I think you can really go a long way with someone. And the more language, warrior language that you use, the more.
So what is a warrior before we talk about the warrior language? I think I can think of it, but everybody might look at warrior a little bit differently. So when you say a warrior, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, everyone's going to feel just a little bit different about theirs. But for a warrior, it's like, they see themselves primarily as a warrior because they feel like they're fighting a lot of battles. And so there could be, for example, like they would see their marriage as a castle, and and their marriage, a lot of things are attacking the castle. There's stress, pressure, finances, in-laws. There's all these just natural and intentional sort of things that attack a marriage or a significant relationship. And yet sometimes, we can lay down the drawbridge and let the enemy in, and which is completely foolish, because then you've lost from the inside out. So, to keep at bay the enemies is really important. So they view their relationship as a warrior. Like, I got to protect the castle of my marriage. So they view a lot of life through this, or let's say in business, if you have a warrior mentality, you're like training and prepping yourself and getting new sales techniques. And there's new ways of talking and relating to your potential clients. And so you just see life through the lens of this warrior type. And, for example, there are other people that I know that view themselves as kings or royalty. And that sounds so arrogant, but it really isn't. It just means that you're responsible for other people, or you have a lot of responsibility. And so some people view themselves as a king or a queen or royalty. And that's a
Right.
good thing. Like that, to be able to nurture that in somebody when someone deeply feels that about themselves is to unlock them in ways that most other coaches or therapists don't.
I love that. So you've spoken about mental imagery and visualization a lot. And it's something that I'm a huge fan of. I tell my coaching clients all the time to visualize, but use all five senses,
Yep.
right? Because to really get into it. And we know that's something that athletes do. Um, what's one visualization technique that you think has had the most profound impact on your clients? And
Hmm.
how can professionals use it in their daily routine so they can sharpen maybe their decision making and their focus?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because you talk to most athletes and they will rehearse or pre-practice movements in their head all the time. Like they'll have, hundreds of reps of seeing themselves do a motion correctly. And they don't focus on what they shouldn't do or what to avoid, but they just focus on doing that positive motion. And it's a really powerful tool, and if athletes can use it, then we can too. It's actually kind of interesting because I have an opportunity to speak to 700 people this upcoming Friday, and I don't love the stage. I don't crave the stage. I've been on it 1,000 times, but I don't crave it. I don't know if anyone else out there that can understand that.
Probably everybody else out there can
Yeah, probably
understand.
most people. And so here I am, and I've got 22 minutes, and I'm keynote speaking, and what I say is going to be measured, and there's there's going to be civil leaders there and religious leaders there, and so here I go, and it's kind of all eyes on me. And so for me, to visualize what I'm going to wear ahead of time, or even put it on and practice at home. Even put on I'm going to be wearing a suit and tie. Like I don't normally wear a suit and tie, but this event I will. And then to be able to walk through and just sort of mimic some of the movements. And so there's two things about visualization, as you mentioned, the 5 different senses and involving them, which is really important. But there's also 2 other ones. There's also 2 other frameworks that we can think about this. Number 1 is called motion focus. So it's actually watching yourself do something, and then having a positive response from the audience or from the client or whatever it is. Another one is still focus. So it's actually like taking a picture of yourself and then you kind of viewing yourself in 3 different dimensions. And it's almost like a virtual reality camera, just sort of watching yourself do something. And I think the involving the 5 senses, the still focus and the motion focus are really powerful ways to prepare for a big event or a high pressure situation.
I would totally reiterate that. I once had a client who was not really great at public speaking, and we kind of did some visualization exercises. But I also I did a hypnotherapy recording for her, and basically with all the senses, and she kind of kept listening it, and I had her imagine what people were saying to her after the presentation. And she said after she did it, people actually were saying something that was very similar to what I had her visualize and hear, and also I had think about the picture. So that's really important. But I want to ask you another thing. So there's some neuroscientists who say visualization is great. And you talked, Gary, about, the athletes will see themselves doing the same shot over and over again and doing it correctly. But some would say sometimes you also have to visualize yourself not doing it correctly and then how you rebound. So literally, if you're a basketball player, right, you don't make the shot, the rebound, etc., and you think about the next thing. What are your thoughts on that? Because the theory is that the brain will then be able to process, okay, if this has gone wrong, I know immediately how to recover from it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. So, one of the reasons why we evaluate our performance at certain or specific times in sports is that we contain the evaluation. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if you can contain the evaluation, let's say in a film room, or
Mm-hmm.
contain the evaluation within, let's say, an hour time period, it's learning how to contain the evaluation, especially the critical or negative, not necessarily
Right.
negative, but critiquing at performance. If you can contain the critique, but use your mental visualization to be able to enhance in positive
Yes.
ways your performance. I think that's the way to go. So, for example,
Otherwise, you're just ruminating on it and thinking,
exactly,
oh, I'll be a victim
exactly.
of all
So
those wrong things. And then you're
you
down that whole rabbit hole of dread and despair, right? Which you don't want.
exactly, yeah, exactly. So if I'm working with a football team that plays Sunday morning, and when's the worst time to evaluate your performance ever? Like right after a game, right? Like that's
Right.
the worst time. So I practice something called postponing your emotions or postponing your feelings. Or scheduling your feelings, whatever works for you. So it's like, well, when is the time in a day or setting where I could learn the most from my performance? And if I can name what that is, if I can identify with that, I can say to myself, you know what, I'll think about it tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Or I'll think about it, from 3 to 4 o'clock today. I'll let myself feel as bad as I want to, and I'll rehash it, and I'll have it go through my mind, or my mistake, or critiquing myself. But after that, and then I'm done. So I think it's about putting boundaries around when you allow yourself to feel and think about those things.
So now we agree on visualization, but now here's a more controversial question. So some might argue that this grind culture where you prioritize hustle over well-being has become toxic, especially among entrepreneurs. So how do you help high performers push past this? And they focus on maybe smarter, not harder strategies for long-term success. And is this hustle mindset even sustainable? Or is there a tipping point where it really becomes counterproductive?
That's such a good question. Yeah, it's the hustle culture is definitely glorified these days. And yet when you get to know these people personally, they don't typically live their life that way. And so a lot of it is sort of living a projection of what you think you want other people to experience instead of living authentically. So for example, like in my life, I get up at 3:45 a.m. It's not something that I'm putting on social media all the time, but it's a discipline that I have for my own life. And so for me, it requires that I go to bed at 9 p.m., like or at 8:30 or 9 p.m. And but we have other people saying, no, I'm working till like 11 o'clock at night and I'm getting up at 4 in the morning. You're not doing it very well. And it's not very smart. I went to a conference one time with the Dallas Cowboys, and the entire conference was teaching the team, out of all the things they could teach a team, out of all the things, the nutrition, the exercise, the kinesiology, all of these things, they focused entirely on recovery. And whichever team rests better than the other team will win. With all things
I
being
need you to repeat that. I need you to repeat that for the people in the back that can't hear it. Say it
yeah,
again.
yeah, the team that rests better, so competitively rests better than the other team, all things being equal, will probably win. The question is why? Well, here's why. Is because the difference between, and there's studies done on this everywhere, the difference between 6 and 8 hours sleep, which doesn't seem like a big deal. And I know that a lot of hustlers and a lot of high performers have trouble sleeping, past 6 hours. But let me tell you, the difference between 6 hours, you're faster, you're stronger, and all these things are scientifically provable. Faster, stronger, more resilient, fast twitch muscles, make better decisions, more emotionally regulated, more stamina. I mean, there's about 20 different things that in fact, I wrote an article about it one time recently. Everything is better when you get that extra rest. And so when you talk about, how do I how do I go from a 94 to a 96? It could be as simple as resting better.
And that is so important. That I do a lot of continuing legal education for lawyers, and a lot of lawyers are team no sleep. Right, I'll rest when I'm dead. I've got these deadlines, and I sit there and I go through and I show them the brain scans. This is what it looks like. Your prefrontal cortex, which is that CEO, which is what you really need to be able to function and make good decisions. It's got to shut down at night and sleep. That's its hygiene, so that you can get up and be better. And the more you have these, the more, and the studies, like you said, are so clear. The more you go without sleep, if you make this your, okay, I'll just get 5 hours, for the next few weeks, and then I'll catch up. You're not going to be able to catch up. And it makes a huge difference. And so you're actually not doing yourself any kind of favors.
Yeah, and it involves the parasympathetic system as well and your
Totally.
hormones. Like when you are more relaxed, you play better. It doesn't mean that you're not engaged or you're lazy. It just means that you are just more well rested and you're able to perform things that you wouldn't normally be able to perform when you're tired. For example,
Right.
like when you're tired, your muscles are more contracted. So yeah, resting well, hydrating, eating well, those can all be the difference between eating. I had a client one time, just this young guy, he was just, um, He was just phenomenal at racing, and so he was in this long distance running, and so he had finished in 13th place. I thought he did absolutely fantastic. He was amazing. But I said, well,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to your sleep, what place out of 100? Because there were 100 racers in the race. I said, when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to let's say sleep, what place do you think you would have finished in? If one was the best sleeper out of 100 and 100 was the worst sleeper, where would you have fit? And he goes, well, because I probably would have finished in like 64th or something like that. And then I said, oh, okay. Well, what about your nutrition? What place would you have finished in? Oh, probably 30th. What about your hydration? Well, I did really well, probably 15th or 10th. I'm like, that's pretty good. So you prepared to finish in about 30 or 35th place, but you finished in 13th. So good for you. However, how well would you have done had you prepared like a top 10 in every area the previous week before your race?
I love that. Wow. That must have been like a mind blowing moment for him where he started really thinking, yeah. Because and there are things we can do that are really and it's hard for some people to get some sleep, but even if it's just an extra 15 minutes, an extra just to realize that it is essential. It's an essential part of the preparation where you're an athlete, whether you're a student, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a school teacher. So let's talk about teams for a second. You spend time with, of course, the athletic teams, but also business teams. What's the single most important factor that separates successful teams from those that struggle to reach their full potential? And how can businesses apply this to cultivate stronger teams? I think where you have people that, some people are working hybrid, some people are working remote, some people are working in office. There's, at the time that we're recording, there's lots of layoffs going on. There's lots of tension and stress. People might be doing more work than they've ever done before because they're taking on the work of two or three people that they weren't doing before. So at a time like this, where teamwork is even more important, and managers have to really think about how can I get my team to rise up to a level that they may never have had to before. This could be their Super Bowl, right? This could be the thing that keeps them being competitive. What's some advice? What do you see that's the difference between the successful teams and the ones that don't work?
Again, a very insightful question. And if sports are any indication of, or can give us any hints as to what that looks like, in sports, there's something called alignment, like having the right personnel on the field, doing the right things at the right time. There's a lot of, the word right is really important here, right? So having the right team with the right vision, with the right strategy, with the right culture, with the right job descriptions, and with the right execution. It's really about those things. And I think there's a lot of different ways to complicate this. But if we're talking about the world of sports and business, I think Nick Saban, who was coach at Alabama, he was one of the most prolific coaches ever in the history of college football. He says it
Mm-hmm.
so simply. I just love it. And one day he was speaking at a car dealership, and he was like, you're all going to look for these amazing truths that I have about football and business and that kind of. He goes, but it's really not that complicated. And granted, I don't think it's very easy to execute, but the principle was very simple. And he said, listen, you have to have a vision that everyone buys into. So that's number one. Number two, everybody's got a role. Number three, everybody has a scorecard. Everybody knows we need to know if we're winning or losing. And number four, we need a daily executional model to make it all work. And he said it's not any more complicated than that. Now, I don't believe him. I think it is more complicated than that. However, I just think at face value, there's a lot of wisdom in what he's saying if you were to really break it down. And that alignment piece, having the right people, knowing their job descriptions and being aligned with their job descriptions, because one of the things I've taught at the business level when it comes to business coaching and working, I'll do workshops and consulting, is oftentimes we'll have a person that has a certain personality type. It's not the personality of the person. It's just how that person is wired and does it match the job description. Because anybody can do something outside of their job description for a
Right.
season, right? For a short amount of time. But if they have to consistently do that, either they will quit or they will be fired due to lack
Mm-hmm.
of performance. And so knowing exactly what that person's personality type and does it match the job. So we call them high contribution zones.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of your personality, you may have a high contribution zone, but does it match the contribution zone that the organization needs you to have? Like, this is what the role requires. And the further distance that there is between those two things, the more stress that employee will feel. And so if that employee constantly feels under pressure or under stress, just like you talked earlier, when you're in your zone, things are easy, things flow. But when you're out of that high contribution zone or out of that flow, everything seems hard and difficult. And so for managers and leaders, putting the right people in the right place can save a lot of headaches.
And again, also goes to knowing your strengths, right? A lot of times we'll have people, sometimes I'll do the Clifton strengths, and I'll do it with teams. I'll say, this is why this person keeps screwing up, because you have them doing all this such and such kind of work when their real strength is way over here. And so they're suffering in silence, and they're not going to get any better at this. And they're going to get more and more resentful.
Yeah, and they want to succeed. And
right.
you do the training, you do the teaching, you do everything you can to help this employee succeed. However, they're just not wired for it. Or there could be another problem. And here's a really interesting sort of turning the diamond angle on this, is that does this person believe in themselves that they can accomplish this job? Which is really, really strange, but it's actually a really common question that we need to be asking ourselves is, do you believe? So in some of my work with the Seattle Mariners, the very first thing the Seattle Mariners tell all their young prospects is, do you believe? And it's not an ethereal sort of rah-rah question. No, it really is true. Do you believe that if you put into practice the training that we're going to give you, do you believe that you can reach your goals, whether it's to become an all-star or make the big leagues or whatever it is? Do you believe? So your level of self-belief has to be high. So if it was like a cup with a scale of 0 being at the bottom, 10 being at the top, well, a lot of people, their self-belief is like a 4. And so no matter what kind of training or no matter what kind of help or what assistance that you pour into this person, they're always going to leak at the level of their self-belief. And so that's why you and I are the CBOs, we're the chief belief officers of our organizations, because we need them to believe in themselves. And if they don't believe in them or the organization, no matter what you pour into them, they're just going to leak at that 4.
And I think too few leaders know this. Managers don't necessarily know this, right? The manager, the supervisor, if they don't think of themselves as a leader, they can't help other people believe in themselves, and they can't even understand why that's important. So we're talking about believing in yourself, which is positive, but you have some specific views about positivity when you're at the highest level. You say it doesn't work, and it could be dangerous. So why is that? And then what actually does work?
Well,
this was that cryptic question we were talking about before. Like, what if it's not about positivity? So let's get to that. What do you mean by that?
Well, positivity is helpful in shorter spurts of time. So think of it like I'm in a situation and I need to look at the positive side of something. So it is efficacious in moments, but it also depends on my mood, depends on the situation, depends on the people around me. I can try and be as positive as I can. However, sometimes we have to lie to ourselves. Maybe we're in a really awful situation and we're trying to be positive. No, the situation is just awful. Like it just is not good, or something that happens is really, really not good. So we can try and be positive, but it's at the risk of not being honest with ourselves and honest with the people around us. But something that does work is optimism. And the reason why optimism is better, I call it a cleaner burning fuel than positivity, is because optimism always requires a reason. So it's very rational and logical. Always requires a reason for you to be optimistic. And so if someone says, well, I'm going to, go down a ski hill, Black Diamond ski hill, and I'll say, well, what reason have you given yourself to be optimistic that you can do this? And if you can't name any, it's better for you not to go down. And unfortunately, I have a couple situations in my life where people that I know personally have died going down a Black Diamond ski hill. And it was the positive reinforcement, the positive talk, a lot of positivity that encouraged these people to go down these Black Diamond ski hills. And it was dangerous, actually, for them. So optimism always requires a reason. So when I'm talking to an athlete, I'll say, well, what reasons do you have to give yourself a reason to be optimistic that you can win this game? And if you can give me reasons that you're optimistic that you can win this game, we're good to go. But if you can't give me those reasons, then I'm more skeptical about whether you believe that you can actually accomplish this and win this game. And I think it's the same way in business. What reasons do your employees give you to be optimistic that you can reach your goals for this quarter? And if you can't give you and your team reasons to be optimistic, then you better get to work working on the reasons to be optimistic. But just being positive, you know, okay for a moment, but most of the professional athletes that I know,
Yeah.
none of them. In fact, I was at a mental performance sports psychology conference a couple of years ago in Las Vegas, and I can tell you that performance at the highest levels, I think in 2.5 days, we mentioned the word positivity once, and
Mm.
that was it. So, I think for most professional athletes, listen, you just have to be a really good, and this is what I think is the holy grail of all performance, is you have to lead yourself well. You don't always need to be motivated. Okay. That comes and goes. You certainly don't need to be positive, but if you lead yourself well, you will do things even when you're not motivated. You will put in the work, you will practice, you will watch film, you'll put in the extra hours, and you're accumulating practice and time to get really good at things when your opponents don't feel like they're motivated, so they don't do it. So being self-led and finding a reason, that drivenness, finding the reason for you to succeed and working hard at those things, man, you're really hard to beat. And I want to create hard to beat athletes. So even if you're not motivated, you're still really, really hard to beat because your self-leadership is so on par and in tune that you're just good at what you do.
What do you say to those people who are they want to do better, but it's hard for them to get that sense of motivation,
Hmm.
right? They are, you know, they just, whether they're dealing with depression, whether they're just dealing with family things going on, whether they're feeling like I've tried so many times and I've done my best, but it doesn't work. Because there are going to be some people who are going to be listening here that are going to say, all great. Of course, if I'm an athlete and I'm not motivated by that big paycheck, I'm motivated by this. So what about the people who they want to do better, but what's a question or what's something that you could say just to get yourself, there's some people that they just need help getting out of bed today, right? So how do they lead themselves well?
Yeah, great question. So motivation is not the problem. Resistance is.
Okay.
They have a resistance to something. So resistance is the culprit. So for example, they might say to themselves, well, in order for me to be successful, I'm really going to have to change the way I do things or change my habits or change my rhythms. Well, yeah, you probably are. You're right. And that's a resistance that they are feeling inside. So
Mm.
they're not motivated to something, but they have an internal resistance because of something. Or it could be that, let's say, they feel so overwhelmed they don't even want to begin. And so that
So the
sense
first
of
step is too
overwhelm
big
is
for
a
them.
resistance.
Yep. So
And
that even that
people
first
have
step is
different,
way too big.
yep, yep. And people have different ways to deal with that sense of overwhelm. So there's a lot of different reasons why, but I think mostly there's some resistance underneath the surface that they have. So it's not just, am I motivated enough by something? No, there's some resistance. There's some resistance that's causing them just to be paralyzed.
And I think that's such a really important distinction for the people who, well, if I just had something to motivate me, I think you are, I mean, not I think, I know you are right on this. Number one, because you're a professional. And number two, because it makes so much sense. So for the listeners and the watchers out there, I want you to think about, what are you resisting? Like Gary said, does that mean, all right, if I really want to get this promotion, that means I got to take those extra courses. Well, if I take those extra courses, it's going to take a lot of time and I barely have any free time myself. And so I don't know if I want to do it. So that's the resistance. The resistance is to the change that you're going to have to make, to the person you're going to have to become, the person that does have to get up at the same time every day, the person that does have to sit there and say, all right, I'm going to cut off Netflix and as a matter of fact, I'm going to cut the subscription so I'm not tempted, because otherwise I'm going to binge watch that thing instead of binge watching the videos for the course for me to get that next certification. So I think if people start thinking, that's the question to ask, not, what would motivate me, but what am I resisting and why? What is that change that I'm going to have to make that I don't want to do? And, and it also goes to what you're talking about before, because who am I going to become? Sometimes when I talk to people, they say, if I do this, my family is going to think I think I'm too good for them. If I get to this level, I'm not going to have the same friend group. And I said, and you might not, right? And maybe it's that friend group that you have that is why you are where you are right now, right?
Yeah.
So because that's that resistance, right?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite historians is Thomas Sowell. And Thomas
Mm-hmm.
Sowell said it so well. I couldn't say it any better. I couldn't even imagine it any better. He said, nothing in life is free. Everything costs something. And so am I willing to pay the cost? If you don't do anything, there's a cost. And if you do something, there's a cost. And so, but we get stuck when we don't want to pay either cost. That's where we get stuck. And so I just think movement is better than non-movement. So if we can have a predisposition or a default to action, I like to call it, like if we could default to action and not overthink it, what's the action
Yeah.
that you want to take to move forward?
We started the podcast and I talked about it's not positivity, it's neutral thinking. So, what is neutral thinking? Because you've gotten us from positivity to optimism, but now you've got a concept of neutral thinking. And how does that help people reset themselves?
Yeah, it's part B. So part A is the reset button. Part B is the neutral thinking. So think of it this way. Think of neutral thinking having a focus on the task. So you're task focused. But we get hung up on the self focus. What did I do right? What do I do wrong? What am I supposed to do? And we constantly judge ourselves to the point where we don't even do anything because we're so full of judgment. So if we can turn down the judgment button on ourselves and not be self-focused, and the other thing is not to be others focused. What will other people think of me? What will my boss think of me? What will so-and-so think of me? What if I don't reach my goals? What if I don't reach my KPIs? What if I don't? And so that's others focused. But being neutral in our thinking is to be task focused. It's to be able to sort of hit the reset button and go into neutral thinking in our minds and say, okay, what do I need to do to accomplish this task? If the previous conversation had nothing to do with the outcome of this task I'm about to perform. And so it's literally just saying, what do I need to do to be successful in this moment? And this is an illustration I like to use. This is my hourglass, and this represents the future, and this represents the past. But to live in this present moment is the most powerful thing that we can do. And so if we can be in that present moment and say to ourselves, okay, what do I need to do in this moment to be highly successful? And now you're giving yourself reasons to be optimistic, aren't you? Because I'm doing the right thing in the right moment to get an outcome that I hope for. And listen, in life, you can't control outcomes, but you can always put yourself in the best position to succeed. And when you're in the present moment, you give yourself the best opportunity to succeed. And it's actually one of the greatest mantras of my own personal life. And what I teach probably everywhere I go is you cannot control outcomes, but you can always put yourself in the best position to succeed. Build that confidence, build those habits. A lot of people just like viscerally respond negatively to the word habit. We can change the word to rhythm. What are the rhythms that I need in my life that constantly put myself in the best position to succeed, so that when you wake up in the morning, you're not thinking about what outcomes you want to see that day. Your first priority is to put yourself in the best position to succeed. And so what can I do that I have full control over to put myself in the best position to succeed? And so it might be getting 7 hours sleep, eating healthy, making sure that I have some blue sky time in my life every single day where I get to dream a little bit and take action on those dreams. It might be quoting my personal philosophy or my purpose or my calling. Or the vision that I have for life. There's so many things, or some people like to say, I like to listen to music first thing in the day. Then you should put yourself in the best position to succeed every single day. That is the most important thing that you can do. And then what that is doing is it's changing your locus of control. So if the external world is controlling how you feel about life and yourself, you're in for a real roller coaster ride. But if you can control those things that put you in the best position to succeed every single day, and that becomes the most important list of your entire day, you're going to live a really amazing life because you're constantly putting yourself in the best position to succeed. So even when you do have a bad day or difficult things happen, you're more prepared than anyone to be able to deal with those things because you've done everything that you can do to put yourself in the best position to succeed. That is true optimism.
I love that. Do you believe in vision boards?
I do.
And why do they work? And how do people use them effectively? So some people like every January I'm going to do a vision board, and then they stick it up there and then nothing happens. Why you recommend them, and why do they work?
Well, it's part visualization. Like a lot of people talk about manifesting and they'll talk about like seeing what could happen in the future. And I'm not as big on the manifesting part, but what I am doing is saying is into soaking in your vision. Like, what is the vision that you have for your life or for this year or whatever it is? Like, you need to soak in that. And then I teach something called 4x4s. So, what are four goals that you have every trimester? So, four goals every 4 months. So, let's say, September to December, January to April, and May to August. So, what are the four goals I have for these next 4 months? So, it's short enough that you got to get on it, but it's long enough that you've given yourself time to do it. And so you need to take action on those four things, like move toward your overall vision. And I think when you do that, amazing things can happen because, like, for example, one of my things was meeting a head coach in the NFL, this particular head coach in the NFL. And I thought, well, how am I ever going to get a hold of this person? And so I worked at it. I worked at it for days and days and days. I worked at it. I probably put 10 or 15 hours into trying to, and then I found the email address of this coach. It was the janitor at thepatriots.com. That was his email address, the head coach.
How funny is that?
The janitor. And so he ended up actually responding to me, but that was on my vision board. It was, I call them mountain peaks. Like if I could climb this mountain peak, that would just be so wonderful. And I just kept it front and center. And so the vision board is really powerful, and taking action on them in easy, manageable steps is really important. And you just move toward them, make space, like define time in your schedule to make your dreams come true. And you have no idea how close they are.
So you've given us a ton of great advice, but what is the best advice you ever received that you did not take? And how did that affect your life? I mean, it could be from the time you were little,
What a great question. The best advice that I didn't take was, Gary, don't pay attention to other people. Don't compare yourself to other people. And this is the day and age where we look at Instagram and we look at social media. I mean, and you look at the most successful people in your business and you compare yourself to them. And so I wish I would have taken that advice 20 years ago, just because a lot of that ate me alive, because you're constantly being compared to other people. You are in a lot of ways, but I didn't need to pay attention to that, and it revealed a lot of anger and jealousy and bitterness and just a lot of emotions in me that when I was squeezed, I didn't like what was coming out. Like I didn't like that about myself. And so I just tell people now that, I'm working on it, and I try not to compare myself to other people. And the result for those things was just frustration and anger and whatever. And, like an over focus on myself. But what I had to do, and this is maybe perhaps a strange way to deal with this, but I had to remove some of those connection points with those things from my life. So, for example, have you ever read something in a book where you kind of go, that is so good. Like, I wish I would have said that, or I wish I would have come up with that. And so there's that teeny bit of jealousy in you. And so I thought to myself, you know what? What if I guess I just need to stop reading that person's books. And so I stopped. But what I filled that void with was research papers. And so now I like to read scholarly research papers on topics. You can go to Google Scholar or find books in the library or scholarly papers online. And that to me has been so much more enjoyable. That way I can come up with my own language about saying things. And maybe I'll miss out maybe on some of the latest and greatest and, the hot and sexy phrases or words or concepts. But I get to actually figure out how I feel about these things. And I get to come up with wording, like, for example, like information is like calories. If you have too much, if you think too much about things, it weighs you down. And if you can't expend those thoughts on a daily basis, it slows you down. And so if you're working with, a lot of professionals and lawyers and that kind of thing, the thoughts are a dime a dozen, like you're thinking all day long and there's a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. Well, how do you think less? How do you think less at your job? And is that even permissible? Is it even helpful? But if you can't, how can I think less when I'm away from my job in ways that are not maladaptive, but are healthy and encouraging? So I just like to learn to say things in ways that other people haven't. And I just find a lot of joy in sharing those things with other people.
Information is like calories. Too much of it's going to weigh you down. That is so true, because I have found myself listening to so many other voices, whether it's YouTube videos or podcasts. And of course, you want to learn, but at some point, I'm like, okay, but
Yeah,
I need the space to think about what do I think, independent of all of these other thoughts. And I think we're in a society where there's so much information overload where people, I'm going to go on Instagram, I'm going to learn how to do this, and here's this hack, and I'm going to go on TikTok, and I'm going to do this. And sometimes we don't give ourselves space to think, or like you said, go to the primary resources, read the real research, and then think about what do you think about what that says? How does that work in your life? So
exactly.
you've talked about working with athletes and CEOs. Do you work with regular people? And if you like, and if just a regular person wants to work with you, how do they reach you?
Oh, I do. And it's one of my favorite things in the world. I have
I
a
mean, of course,
mom.
everybody who's listening is not regular. You
Of
guys are
course.
extraordinary.
Yeah.
Of course, people sit there and say, "What do you mean regular?"
Yeah.
But
No, there's
you work
a
with
mom.
non-CEOs, non-athletes. That's what I'm asking.
Exactly. No, there's a mom in my life who was listening to me on social media, and she called me and she said, "Hey, would you help me create a championship culture in my home with my kids?" And I was
Wow.
like, "What? I never thought about this." And so I led her through these series of exercises, and just like I would with a pro or college football team or other sports team. And I took her through the process, and she said it made such a huge difference in her life. And so, yeah, I have a lot of joy in just working with just average, everyday, what I call heroes, and they are heroes because of the things that they do, and they do amazing things that nobody sees, and I just think it's absolutely delightful and wonderful. So, yeah, if people want to get a hold of me, I usually hang out on Instagram. I'm Elite Mindset on Instagram. I have a blue verification dot, so I know there's a couple accounts that are Elite Mindset, but mine is with that blue dot. And then my website is elitemindsetnation.com, because I want to create a nation of high performers who are risk taking and bold and leaders and understand their influence, and who understand their purpose and calling and the vision that they have for their life, and then have a mind to be able to sort of live that out. So, and people can find me on LinkedIn, or they can Google my name. I'm sort of,
And it's Gary Chupik, Chupik, for those who are listening and not looking. And we'll, of course, have all this stuff in the show notes. So, what is one thing you want people to remember from this episode? If they remember nothing else, what's the most important takeaway you want them to have, Gary?
Yeah, I would say this. I would say that you are made perfectly just the way that you are. And your job is to get to know yourself. And don't worry about surrendering to yourself. It's the most beautiful thing that you can do. Quit fighting yourself and just surrender to the way that you are, and then maximize just who you are.
That is a perfect way to end this. Thank you to Gary Chupik from Elite Mindset. If you liked this episode, and I know you did, and I think this is one of the most shareable episodes I've ever done, please make sure to share it with your friends, subscribe to the podcast, and please make sure that you follow Gary on his various social media, because this was a lot to absorb. But the more you kind of go in and follow what he's saying on Instagram, etc., day by day, you can build that elite mindset and have that championship program, whether it's in your home, your business, your job, or just more importantly, within yourself. So thanks again, Gary, for being with us. This
Yeah,
has been a
thank you
great
very much.
conversation.